Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology Debunking Mythology. And Sattology means science of truth, or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means science of fake lie imagination or study of fake lie imagination. Mythology has destroyed the identity of natives of the world purposefully by the academic West, and just so that they can show that they're superior. And when I say academic West, it starts from Middle East and goes all the way to American and European universities. Sattology is the Indic or the Vedic thought process. The word is for the Western audience because they deal with mythology and Sattology. The better word in Sanskrit is itihas. That is, I always said that and I always say it. If you're from Sanskrit speaking lands or origin is Sanskrit, then itihas is the perfect word for it. Itihas means is what actually happened. I have a very, very special guest, and he is a family member of a Sankaracharya from India, Pandit Kota Venkatachelam, who was one of the moment you use Sankaracharya, nothing else needs to be added after that, from Sringeri Mutt. So people who belong to Sringeri Mutt, for them it will be a wonderful place to see what their predecessor has spoken on chronology. And his grandson, Sastri Yanamandra, is joining us from the capital of United States. So welcome, Sastriji.
Namaste, Aditya. Thank you for having me again.
Sastri, it's always a welcome. And I'm really honored to have you all the time because I personally visited your place and I could never forget a face. And I remembered you when you called me last time. I said, yes, I know you. Somehow it happens, some special people are etched in your memories sometimes. So, Sastriji, before we start off today, and last time we discussed about the life of His Holiness Sankaracharya Pandit Kota Venkatachelam. Today, we are going to speak about the Puru Paksha. And also, before we start off, I wrote a book on Ramayana purely based on Valmiki Ramayana. I proved that it's on 00 meridian. And before me and after me, anyone who has read Valmiki Ramayana has proved it and has said it. And so we start off with Pandit Kota Venkatachelam, who has done phenomenal work in chronology and as well as, like you mentioned, the position of different islands across the Jambudweep. So we start off from there. So what was his position on Lanka as per Shastra that he calculated? You can show the slide if you want to do that.
Certainly. Let me share my screen.
While he's showing the slides, but just to let you know, every single Acharya has said the same thing, right? From Madhvacharya, Prabhupada, Shankaracharya. So people belonging to different sampradayas have said the same thing. So it doesn't matter. It's a universal knowledge given by Valmiki. So yes, please go ahead.
Yes, is my screen visible?
Yes, very clear.
Yes, so this is his description of Jambudweepa. And this was published in the book called Manava Srishti Vijnanam. This was published in 1949. And in that, he says that there were the northern and the southern hemispheres, that the northern hemisphere is where all the land was. The Jambudweepa, which is the Surabhaga, it was a single landmass which extended from Asia through Europe, Africa, North America, as well as Gondwana and Lemuria. Now, having defined this, the southern hemisphere was totally submerged, and that Mount Meru, which is at the center, depicted by the number 10, Mount Meru was located over here, meaning at the North Pole. And the prime meridian in ancient times used to pass through Hastinapur, Ujjain, Kanyakumari, and Lankapuri. And Lankapuri, he said, was on that prime meridian and at the intersection of the equator, meaning about 0 degrees, actually 1 degree north. So 1 degree north is where Lankapuri is situated. And in fact, if I could draw your attention to this book, Manava Srishti Vijnanam, on page 53, he talks about this. And here is a diagram. Here is a diagram. I'll hold it closer to the camera. Here is a diagram. What he is showing is the path from the Valmiki Ramayana that Sugriva and his group actually travel. They go to the west coast from Chitrakuta and then turn south. And in going south, they pass through, they stop at Malayagiri, which is the ashram of Agastya Mahamuni. And from there, they continue going farther south until they reach Mahendragiri, where it meets the ocean. And Hanuman traveled south from Mahendragiri, which is Kanyakumari, not east. And he went 100 yojanas, depending on how you translate yojana, it could be about 500 miles. 500 miles south from Kanyakumari is almost at the equator, which is south of the Maldives. And so he says there, Sinhala, which is what is Sri Lanka today, Sinhala Dvipa is different from Lankapuri, Lanka Dvipa. So that is Panditji's assertion. Adiji?
This is this has been independently now verified by various acharyas, not just we or new. Anyone who goes through the Valmiki Ramayana will come to this conclusion. So what an accurate. And see, the thing is, in my last book, One Arrow, One Kill, and it's coming in India as a global footprint of Ramayana. Pandit Kota Venkatachelam's position, you have given me the book, but my book was published before that, but I just followed the Valmiki Ramayana logic and Valmiki Ramayana directions, how the Vanaras are going to different places. Exactly same information. Sita says the same thing. Hanuman tells the same thing. And I also justified that today's Simhaladweep, because the Lanka had gone down, Vibhishan had to move to some land. And so he moved to Simhaladweep, which was also part of their empire during that Ravan's time. And then it is called Pratibhu. Pratibhu means is an image. Like, for example, England, New England, Vrindavan in India, New Vrindavan in the US, Dwarka in India, New Dwarkapuri in the US. Like that, acharyas establish those things. So coming to the Purva Paksha on the chronology now of Pandit Kota Venkatachelam, and viewers, I want you to see this map again and again, save it, record it, and it's on the show, that this is told by all the acharya, not just Sankaracharya has said it, Madhvacharya before has said it, Ramanujacharya has said it. So if people say the Sampradayas fight, it's debunked here. Everyone is talking the same thing. Somebody asked one great saint that it looks like Prabhupada. He asked Prabhupada that your teaching seemed to be like exactly that Ramanujacharya. And so immediately Ramanujacharya, Prabhupada said, it's a great honor. Something like that, it's a great honor. So Sampradayas have no conflict. It's the peoples have conflict. They create this thing. Now coming to the Purva Paksha, where Pandit Kota Venkatachelam focused on creating a chronology, which he focused on it. So let us begin there. What were the essential parameters that he used to build his chronology for us?
Yes. So this is the Purva Paksha, the problem that needed to be solved. So is my screen visible, Adiji?
Visible. If you want to make it full screen, try that if you can.
I have found a problem when I do that, because when I move from page to page, it doesn't change on the screen to the viewers.
Yes, I will. So stay like this. We'll get started.
Very good.
Okay. Yeah.
So actually, this is extensive material that I have condensed into 2 slides here. So the first one is, why did Indian chronology need to be reconstructed? 200 years ago, nobody felt a need to do so. But there was a need discovered recently. And the reason was that there were extensive distortions made to Indian history. So who were the people that made those distortions? I have a small list here, but of main people: William Jones, Max Muller, George Bueller, Fleet, and Purgator. So these is a sampling of the names. You will notice that all of them are mercenaries of the East India Company. Now, the difference is William Jones belonged to the 18th century, and Max Muller and all the others were in the 19th century, almost 80 years or 100 years after William Jones. So these are the people who made the distortions in Indian history. Now, why? So William Jones in the 1750s was a staunch Christian, and he was looking at all the Indian texts through a biblical lens, looking for the great deluge, Noah's Ark. And so he could not accept dates older than what the Bible said. So according to the Old Testament, the world was created in 6 days and God took rest on the seventh, and that apparently happened in October 4004 BC. So this was the main reason, this was the problem. And so William Jones decided arbitrarily that Indian history had to start in 2029 BC because he could not reconcile that with 4004. And so this was an arbitrary decision by William Jones. So what did he do? One thing I think that is important to understand is that the Western calendar and the Hindu calendar are very different. They have nothing in common. So it is not possible to translate a date from one calendar into the other and vice versa. So what is needed is a global event that connects the two calendars. And that connection is called synchronism. So William Jones relied on synchronism. And what he found was, looking at Western history, the only global event he could find was Alexander's trip to the East. And so he was able to determine that that was around 327 BC. And so what he did was, in order to shorten and ensure that Indian history starts no later than 2029 BC, he actually made Chandragupta Maurya the contemporary of Alexander. Although the real contemporary of Alexander was Chandragupta of the Gupta dynasty. You see, there were two Chandraguptas in Indian history, one of the Maurya dynasty and one of the Gupta dynasty, and they were separated by 1200 years. And by making Chandragupta Maurya the contemporary of Alexander, William Jones pulled Indian history forward by 1200 years. So that is why he did it, because he could not reconcile dates older than 4004 BC. So what did he do? He removed 1000 years before the Mahabharata war. He removed 1200 years after the Mahabharata war. He dated several events incorrectly, and corroborating Indian texts, the Nepal Rajavamsavali, he shrunk that by 3,400 years by mapping it to a wrong era. So it's the Sriharsha era that he mapped to the Siladitya. He made interpolations in the Puranas. So what they did was, they could not accept the Hindu calendar. They could not accept Indian dates. They could not accept Indian eras. So therefore, what they did was, they, in the name of making translations, they started making interpolations into the Puranas. And then, having introduced those interpolations, they used that to say this cannot be believed, and therefore the text is unreliable. So that is how they rejected all Indian texts, and they relied more on small recounts of foreign travelers who visited India, like Megasthenes, like Huan Sang from China. So going for over here, they also inserted spurious slokas in the Nepal Rajavamsavali and in Kalhana's Rajatarangini. They removed many kings and they shortened reigns of others. Then They even forged coins, and they forged inscriptions to support their new dates. And in the process, they actually destroyed genuine evidence. Now, while all this was happening, William Jones went to India to join the Supreme Court in Bengal. And there, what started was an anthropological study of India. So they started the Royal Asiatic Society, where Indians were not allowed, but everything they were discussing was about India and Indian history and Indian chronology. So what they were writing was for a Western audience, and they were studying India like an anthropologist studies a dead civilization. But India was not a dead civilization. India was alive and well. But they would not involve Indians in the research. They would not include Indians in validation of their findings. India and Indians were not the audience for their work. It was the West. And that was the way that they did it. Now, the last bullet over here is they created the Aryan race and the Aryan invasion theory. And this was principally Max Miller, about 80 to 100 years after William Jones. In 1850, Max Miller created the Aryan race, and people after him came up with the Aryan invasion theory and started strengthening it over time. So in Western literature, the term Aryan race is not found before 1850, before Max Miller created it. So on the whole, I'd like to summarize to say that the tragedy in all of this is that philologists wrote Indian history on very skimpy and questionable evidence. Max Miller was a philologist, William Jones was a philologist, and philologists wrote Indian history based on very skimpy and questionable evidence. So the last point on this slide, I introduce Greek synchronism. So that synchronism was necessary because the Eastern calendar, the Western calendar, and the Hindu calendar cannot be translated from one to the other, and therefore you need a global event. And in this example, I point out that William Jones used Greek synchronism, meaning Alexander's travel to the East. So what was the evidence that he based his findings on? It is supposedly a book called Indica. And Indica is supposed to be the accounts of Megasthenes and his stay in India. Megasthenes stayed in India for about 3 years. But let's stop to think about this book. According to Western historians, Alexander came or reached the Indian border around 327 BC. He never crossed the Sindhu River. He never entered India. He was driven away from the Sindhu River and died on the way back. Now, that was 327. Alexander had a general called Seleucus. And Seleucus sent Megasthenes as an ambassador to India. And apparently Megasthenes is reported to have written a book called Indica, which describes his stay in India. Now, this book was never found. It was never found. Then there were two historians called Arrian and Strabo. So Strabo lived around 64 BC. So that would be about 260 years after Megasthenes. And Arrian lived around 150, 160 AD. So almost 500 years after Megasthenes. Now, Arrian and Strabos wrote commentaries on Indica, but even those books are not to be found anywhere. Later historians wrote some commentaries where they quoted from Arrian and Strabos' books. And it was not until the 19th century, 1800 and something, that an Englishman called J.W. McCrindle published an English text called Indica, and he claimed that it was Megasthenes' India as described by Arrian. So that is the evidence. It's extracted from a book in 1800s, which is a collection of commentaries from the second century AD and first century BC for an event that took place in 327 BC. So that is the basis for William Jones's research. Very sad. Now, the example of the synchronism here is, what did he find in that book? In that book, according to William Jones, Megasthenes went to the court of Chandragupta Maurya. And in Indica, William Jones came across three names that you see over here: Sandrames, Sandracotus, and Sandrasiptus. When he went through Hindu texts and looked at genealogies, he found one where we had Mahapadmananda, Chandragupta, Bindusara, which is the Maurya dynasty of the 16th century BC. In the second, he found Chandramas, Chandragupta, and Samudragupta of the Gupta dynasty, which is 327 BC. So in looking at these three names, you can see that Sandracotus seems to match with Chandragupta, but there are two Chandragupta, so you had to pick one. Now, if you look at the other two, you see Sandrames matches Chandramas more closely, and Sandrasiptus matches Samudragupta. Yet, in spite of being a brilliant philologist, William Jones picked the Maurya dynasty and said this is what Megasthenes was referring to. And this is the error that he introduced, by which Indian history moved forward by 1200 years. Adiji?
So accurately pointed out, because the most of the biblical propaganda is it's like a chaotic world all the time. Like, if you don't understand it, destroy it. That's what is going on. They purposely create these kind of mythologies so that they can undermine other native cultures. Now, did you finish presenting right now?
No, I have one more slide.
One thing I must add before you continue, that they talk about, like, you and I have been asked all these questions again and again. What's your nationality? Right. And my answer to that is, what's yours? Which continent you came from? Are they Italian or French or where you come from? But they will never, I mean, when it comes to Native Americans are the original residents of this country. Now, there is no discussion in the public forum on them, any society, anywhere, So that again shows the mythological mindset and also the gross human rights violations also. Please continue. We'll talk at the end of the show.
Right. So moving on to these distortions resulted in the following: Buddha, Chandragupta Maurya, Patanjali, Adi Sankaracharya were moved forward by 1200 years. The Andhras and the Satavahanas were moved by 6 centuries, from 833 BC to 220 BC. I mean, there was a lot of doctoring that William Jones had to do to make everything fit, because he was removing a 1,000 years after the war in 1200 years. So he had to compress and make room for it. The Sungas, Kanvas, and the Andhras, who ruled one after the other, were made contemporaries to shrink the timeline further. Now, the Gupta dynasty was moved. Gupta dynasty was contemporaneous to Alexander's time. But they were moved from 327 BC to the 4th century AD. Varahamihira, the great astronomer of Ujjain, in the court of Vikramaditya and a contemporary of Kalidasa, was moved from 123 BC to 505 AD. And in doing so, they actually removed Vikramaditya, his great-grandson Salivahana, 4 dynasties from history, and that those dynasties spanned 1300 years. So if we had to move the history forward by 1200 years, then he had to remove something so that it aligned with the modern time. So 1300 years were removed by removing all the Agnivamsa dynasties, of which Vikramaditya and Salivana were a part. They were the Panvar dynasty that ruled Ujjain, and they were Chakravartis. They actually had eras named after them. They had calendars. The Vikram Samvat was named after Vikramaditya. Salivahana Saka. Salivahana has an era named after him. And they removed them entirely from Indian history and said these people are fictitious. And as a result, the Mahabharata war of 3138 BC was moved to 1931 BC. Kali Yuga of 3102 was moved to 1895. And the Saptarishi era of 3076 BC was moved to 1869. Not only this, they also tampered with the inscriptions, they tampered with the prashastis, they forged coins, and in some cases they even forged inscriptions to validate their dates and prove that their dates were correct. So I have a little clip from one of Panditji's books at the lower left. It's probably too small for you to read, but essentially the point here is that they even introduced interpolations in the chronicles of Ceylon, because Ceylon and India shared a good deal of history. So and it's not just Ceylon, it's Ceylon, China, Egypt, and Greece. They actually introduced interpolations for references regarding India so that their dates could fit. So in summary, I would like to say that Panditji summarizes his analysis of this, and he has 8 types of criticisms against these Western Indologists. He said, 1, they are misreading Indian texts. 2, they have created forgeries. They are misinterpreting. And he does cite instances where they actually destroyed genuine evidence. The 5th criticism he levels is misrepresentation of facts, rejection of genuine inscriptions as being spurious, and then misapplication. And 8, of course, is neglecting genuine inscriptions. So, Adiji? So this was the problem that Panditji needed to solve. So he was defining the problem through the traditional process of Purva Paksha. He identified what was done, why it was done, who did it, and understood their motives. And the distortions were so widespread that it was difficult to correct them one by one. So he decided the best approach would be to start from the very beginning and just recreate Indic chronology from primary sources and not rely on what was republished by the East India Company. Adiji?
So thank you so much for this presentation slide today on the Purva Paksha. But I see here that the Kali Yuga of 3102 BC moved to 1895 BC. Now, all these distortions were done by philologists, not the actual chronologists.
That's right, not by historians. It is by language experts.
Language experts. That's right. That's right. And when we look at when we talk about in the you and I live here, and when we talk to these scholars, the arrogance is so high.
Yes.
They are not willing to admit the faults because there is a scholarly consensus. So if 10 people who don't know anything about anything and they agree amongst themselves that yes, that is the truth, then what is the outcome? And I don't want to use the harsh word, but everyone can guess it, the word. They can choose the word in their own mind. What are they trying to make of the other people? Right. So if you have finished, then did you finish the slides right now or one more?
Yes, I'm done with the Purva Paksha.
Okay. Thank you so much, Shastri ji. One more question I have, and we will stop the slide share. So when Shankara, His Holiness Sankaracharya or Param Pujya Sankaracharya was creating this chronology for all of us to learn, and what a great fortune that after so many years we are able to see it through your help. that what was the his opposition during that time when he was doing it amongst the community?
Um, it was tremendous. I mean, everything that we see today, the left liberal cabal and the opposition to changing their narrative existed even in his times. And he's very critical about that group of people, that they didn't, some of them didn't even have the courage to proofread his books because people who believed in it were scared for their own reputations. And so some of those people refused to believe it for those reasons. And the people who were already polarized into the existing Western grand narrative, of course, thought like the Western Indologists, and they rejected this outright. So this existed. It was not new. And what we are seeing is 2 degrees worse, but it clearly existed even 100 years ago when Panditji started his research.
So, for all the good things, opposition has to be there. Otherwise, there's no fun to it. You are actually doing the shaking up of the existing norms, and purely based on Shastra. I mean, Valmiki has said it, Vyasdev has said it, and multiple times it has been referred to. So this opposition continues even till date by a lot of people who want to bring in new ideas. So we can easily say that the Sankaracharya, Pandit Kota Venkatachelam, was a pioneer as well as he was a what do you call it? Disruptive force from for the existing status quo during that time, right?
Yes, for 2 things. One is the Aryan invasion theory. He was the first person to promote an out of India theory. He actually suggests that the migrations were not into India, but out of India. He is a pioneer in that topic. And when we go to the Uttarapaksha, I will spend some time on that topic. But yes, he was very critical of the Western Indologists and their distortions. And he did extensive research. This was before the days of telephones and the internet and Google. So to research these books are not easily found everywhere. They're usually in state libraries or in mathas. And so he had to travel to various places from Vijayawada, where he used to live, to get to libraries and these are not books that you can check out. So he had to sit there, make notes and copy parts that he wanted. And then he had to correlate his findings across contemporary literature, other sources. So in a way, he was a pioneer, and he is the only person that I know that has actually reconstructed chronology from Shruti and Smriti.
So one more question comes in the mind, because people reject Bhagavad Puran for some reason or the other. But all major acharyas have considered it one of the sources, the most authoritative sources. But general propaganda is made. Number 1 is Mahabharata, don't keep in the house. Number 2, Bhagavad Puran is something is to be rejected. Everyone jumps to Rig Veda and other places. So what was Pandit Kota Venkatachelam's point of view on this topic actually?
Oh, he, being a traditional scholar, he believed in the ancient texts. So I don't think he had any biases from one text to the other. He actually consults all of them. In fact, he quotes from the Rig Veda extensively. He quotes from the Atharva Veda. He quotes from the Bhavishya Mahapurana. You see, the Panva dynasty and the Agnivamsa dynasties that Vikramaditya and Salivahana were a part of are not covered in the Bhagavad Puran. So the Bhagavad Puran chronology stops with the fall of Magadha, meaning the Gupta dynasty. So at the start of the Gupta dynasty is where the Bhagavad Puran ends. And if you have to continue past that point, you have to refer to the Bhavishya Mahapurana to get the details of Vikramaditya and of Salivahana. So Panditji truly believed in all the texts, and he had no biases for one text versus another.
So thank you so much, Shastri ji. What a wonderful discussion. Today's discussion point is that Lanka, where is Lanka? And Purva Paksha on Pandit Kota Venkatachelam, and also Pandit Venkatachelam, His Holiness Sankaracharya, he did not neglect any Purana or any Mahabharata text or Vedic text. He combined all of them. And that's where I say, triangulation. Triangulation is a very common word. You are a PMO, you know that. Triangulation is used in all the modern, when you want to arrive at a good scientific conclusion. And this is a very common practice. So if you want to validate your understanding of Gita, Bhagavad Puran comes as a very helpful tool. Mahabharata comes as a very helpful tool. And if you want to validate your dates, chronology, then Bhavishya Puran you just mentioned, Bhagavad Puran is where the Gupta period you correctly mentioned. Vishwas Furji is the last king mentioned over there, Vishwas Furji, and which is accurate over there. So this is how you arrive at the proper conclusion. If you remove something, then it is no longer scientific because you're excluding evidences now. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, and that's a proper way. You may, and also I want to tell to all the people who are on the dates also, all our good friends are there, Nilesh Oak and wonderful friends, Rupa Bhati, they've done a wonderful research. And all of their findings are also in a way, when they use, it's up to us to calculate, how we calculate, how we have arrived at conclusions. And this is what the Shastras are encouraging us, that you read it, come to your own conclusion before you ask a question. Isn't it right? Am I right?
That's true.
So Pandit Venkatachelam has given us a methodology, and he has given us, and we have just seen the Purva Paksha. And there are 6 wonderful books which are out. If you want to order them, you can text us in the comment section of this video, and then Shastriji will arrange to send them to you. And the 24 books are in pipeline now, right, Shastriji?
That's right.
24. So 24 total are available now. So thank you so much for all of you for joining the show, and to Shastri ji for bringing this valuable information in front of all of us. And we'll have many more shows with Shastri ji. Once this series ends, we'll have other shows starting. We'll take up the smaller sections of Shankaracharya's books. Namaste and namaskar. Have a wonderful day. And
thank you, Aditya ji.
Thank you.